Perek Aleph, Mishnah Beis. Mishnah Gimel will discuss certain activities that one may not engage in when it's getting close to Shabbos, lest he continue that malacha activity into Shabbos itself. And that teaching is prefaced with our Mishnah, which mentions certain activities that a person should not engage in on any day of the week when it's close to the time to daven mincha. For the Rabbanan were concerned that the person would become preoccupied with what he is doing, and he might as a result forget to daven mincha altogether. And so the Mishnah says, halacha is, lo yeshev adam lifnei hasapar samuch lemincha achi yispalel. One may not sit before a barber to get a haircut when it's close to the time to daven mincha, that is, within a half hour of the time to daven mincha. Now the time to daven mincha, it technically is as early as one halachic half hour after halachic midday, which we call mincha gedola. One may daven any time from then, all the way until sunset. So if we would understand the Mishnah to mean that the prohibition here begins a half hour before the earliest possible time to daven mincha, that would mean that at halachic noon and chatzos, one would not be allowed to sit in front of the barber for a haircut, even though there's quite an amount of time, depending on when during the year we are. If we're in the summer, there are many hours until the last opportunity to daven mincha. So the Rabbi Bartanuri here mentions the Gemara that says, I'm concerned maybe the scissors will break, and there'll be this really long haircut, and it might take him after the time to daven mincha. But some poskim understand that halacha of our Mishnah applies to the later mincha time called mincha ketana, the smaller mincha, meaning there's less time from this point to daven mincha, and that is, there's only 2.5 halachic hours until sunset, or in other words, 9.5 halachic hours into the day, basically later in the afternoon. Accordingly, our Mishnah would be saying that at 9 halachic hours into the day, in other words, 3 halachic hours after midday, one should not do something like sit in front of the barber for a haircut, lest the activity extend to the point that he has missed the opportunity to daven mincha altogether. Likewise, lo yikones adam lemerchatz, one shouldn't enter a bathhouse, velo leburski, or go into a tannery, velo lechol, or eat a meal, velo lidin, nor sit to judge a case. Even if he's not initially planning on doing any of these activities in a protracted manner, a small meal, a judge just to issue a verdict, or a bathhouse just to sit in the sauna part, or the tannery just to inspect the hides. Nevertheless, it shouldn't begin that when it's close to the time to daven mincha, lest the activity end up becoming protracted and continuing until there's no longer an opportunity to daven mincha. However, the Mishnah adds, V'im hischilu ein mafsikim. If a person had already begun one of the aforementioned activities close to Zman mincha, he need not interrupt the activity to pray mincha. He can finish up what he started, provided that he gauges that he will have enough time after the activity is over to daven mincha before it's literally too late. And the mitzvah to daven mincha, which primarily consists of the tefillah, the Shemona Esrei, is certainly a rabbinic mitzvah. It's not required from the Torah itself, though some Rishonim, including the Rambam, hold that there is a biblical mitzvah to pray, and that mitzvah will be fulfilled with the most minimal prayer. The idea of reciting a particular text, the formula, the Shemona Esrei, is something that was enacted by the Anshe Knesset HaGedolah. So we're dealing with the rabbinic mitzvah. The Mishnah teaches that nevertheless, the Rabbanan implemented this additional safeguard, saying that once it's time to daven, one should not get involved in the kind of activities that could get protracted and cause him to miss out on the mitzvah. But as the Gemara explains, there is an exception to this halacha. In the case of, the Gemara refers to as Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai v'Chaverav, two great Torah scholars on the caliber of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, of whom it could be said that Torasam u'Menasam, that Torah is their occupation, that they're essentially engaged in Torah study without interruption, except for things that are absolutely necessary. For people of that caliber, it isn't necessary for them to interrupt their Torah learning, to daven Shemona Esrei, to daven the Tfilos, Shachris Mincha Marav. However, the Mishnah states, Mafsikim likros Kriya Shema. They must interrupt their learning to fulfill the twice daily obligation of reciting the Shema once in the morning and once at night, for that is a biblical obligation. Hence, even for Shimon bar Yochai v'Chaverav, whose occupation is Torah study, they must interrupt to recite the Shema twice a day. However, as mentioned, ve'ein mafsikin letfila. Such people are not required to interrupt their Torah learning to recite Shemona Esrei. So the halacha we learned at the beginning of the Mishnah, it says even when it's close to daven mincha, person shouldn't get involved in other things that could get protracted. That doesn't apply to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai v'Chaverav. For such people, they don't have to interrupt at all. They can just continue right through Zman Mincha. They're not required to daven the tefillah at all. They would presumably fulfill the biblical obligation, if there is one, by praying some minimal prayer. They're not required to stop to daven Shemona Esrei 3 times a day. Rather, they can simply continue to learn throughout the day without interruption. Perek Aleph, Mishnah Gimel. The Mishnah states, Lo yetze hachayat b'machto samuch l'chashecha shema yishkach v'yetze. A tailor may not go out with his needle when it's close to nightfall of Friday night, lest he continue to carry that, to transport that through the public domain after Shabbos begins, which would constitute a Shabbos violation. He would be transgressing the malacha of Hotzah by carrying his needle through the Rishus HaRabim. V'lo halav v'lo b'kol moso. Nor may a scribe go out when it's close to Shabbos, that is a half hour before sunset, with his quill, his pen. You can't carry that on the street, because maybe I'll forget about it and continue to carry that into Shabbos itself. The Mishnah presents another rabbinic decree of Shabbos, which by the way we refer to as a shavus, and that is, v'lo yefala es kelov v'lo yikra le'or haner. One may not remove the lice from his clothing, nor read by the light of an oil lamp on Shabbos, lest the flames start to flicker, and he forget himself, he'll forget that Shabbos, tilt the lamp to get the oil to collect near the wick, in order for the lamp to burn brighter, which would be certainly a Shabbos transgression of the malach of Havara. Torah says, "Open lo sevaru eish b'chol mashvasechem." One may not kindle a flame on Shabbos. So as a safeguard, the Rabbanan said that one should not read or remove lice from the clothing. In other words, perform an activity in which he's engrossed in that, using the light of the lamp, lest he forget himself and adjust the lamp, make the flame bigger on Shabbos. The Mishnah continues, Be'emes amru, in truth they said. This phrase indicates that the following was received from Halach l'Moshe Sinai, a specific tradition going back to our Sinai, and it also indicates that we rule in accordance with this halacha, and that is a qualification of the above rule, which is that hachazin roa hechen etinokas korem. It's okay for a teacher of young school children to assist their charge, the students, with their reading, even by the light of an oil lamp on Shabbos, avahu lo yikra, as long as the teacher doesn't actually start to read the text himself by the light of the oil lamp. Since he's just giving a glance to check on their reading, it's not a problem. Now, what about the children themselves? Why are they allowed to read by the light of this oil lamp on Shabbos? The Rabbi Bartenura explains from the Gemara that they have fear of the Rebbe, and therefore surely in the presence of the Rebbe will not tilt the lamp on Shabbos. That their fear of the Rebbe standing over them keeps them in check, ensures that they won't forget and adjust the lamp on Shabbos and violate the Malach of Avara. The Mishnah concludes with another rabbinic safeguard that's unrelated to Shabbos, and that is Kiyotzi Bo, a similar rabbinic safeguard regarding a different area of halacha. That is, that the Rabbanan decreed Lo yochal hazavim hazava, that man and woman may not eat a meal together alone if the woman is a zava. That is, if she has experienced discharges of blood a certain number of times at particular points. Essentially, colloquially, we would say that she's a nida. There's a technical difference between a nida and a zava, but essentially, the point is that she has had a discharge of blood in a way that renders her as tameas, forbidden to any man, including even her own husband. The Mishnah says that the Rabbanan implemented a safeguard saying that she should not eat a meal alone with even her own husband, and that even if he himself is tameh, which you might argue is a mitigating factor, that maybe he's feeling too much in pain for there to be an issue, but no, the Mishnah says it's prohibited mipnei hergel avera, that could lead to sin. We're concerned that as a result of the intimate act of having a meal alone together, they might end up unlawfully being together as husband and wife. And so it's necessary, if a couple is having a meal and the wife is in nida, they have to at least put something there, a hecker, a reminder, to remind them of her tamei status, to prevent them from forgetting and sinning.